Dungeon Quest is a dying game, and in this video, I'll be explaining the fatal flaws of Dungeon Quest, why it is dying, and what could potentially be done to stop this, because there is a massive amount of problems. For a step-by-step analysis, we'll be going through the problem with dungeons, the problem with spells, and the problem with warrior. So, the problem with spells. One-tick spells just completely dominate the meta because there is no reason to use multiple tick spells, especially when Inner Focus, Inner Rage, and the enhanced versions exist. And the enhanced versions can be gotten from every dungeon from Volcanic upwards, which has caused rapid destabilization of spells. So much so that if you don't have a one-tick spell, yeah, good luck, lol. But this has been a problem for a long time, even with my Volcanic build right now. Like, I use the Inner Rage Volcanic Lava Sword Death because, well, it's a one-tick spell, and it does 11 trillion damage. And it's just way better than the other warrior spell for Volcanic, which, if I remember correctly, is Lava Barrage. Like, why would you use this? Because I believe you have to aim with this, and it's around the same damage as Lava Sword. Yeah, you have to aim with that to actually be able to hit them. Now, of course, I hit the enemies because the range is stupid, but my point still stands that one-tick spells just completely dominate the meta. Now, this isn't the biggest reason why the game is dying. One-tick spells are causing a lot of players to quit, but this leads into problem number 2, and that is dungeons. Ever since Orbital Outpost, dungeons have become basically impossible to solo for the players who need to do them. Right now I'm on Volcanic Nightmare, and I cannot do this at all. You want to know what my loadout is? It's that. I have a blimmin' legendary and decent-ish Lava King Warrior helmet. Now, of course, I could improve that, but my point still stands. I should be able to at least get through Nightmare, maybe with 1 or 2 deaths, but no, it's near impossible because of the game. It is designed to be played in large groups. Guess what dungeons don't get large groups? All of them, except for the one that was recently added. The only dungeon that you can play in groups now is Gilded Skies. At the time I'm making this video. Maybe in the future there might be another dungeon out there. But my point still stands that dungeons are basically impossible. They're supposed to be possible for people with the loot from the previous dungeon, and should not require you to have loot, and not just any loot, good loot from the dungeon to be able to pass it. That causes problems, and it just makes the game more grindy and tedious than it needs to be. What happened to the previous dungeons, like Underworld or Pirate Island? Those are at least doable with gear from the past dungeon, although difficult. Once you learnt the enemies, you could do it, but these other dungeons, you don't stand a chance. And that leads to a lot of new players quitting. And if you're not getting new players, this leads into problem 3. A lot of current players, like myself, are quitting Dungeon Quest. Do you see where the problem arises here? When older players are quitting the game, and newer players are quitting the game. Everyone's quitting the game, one way or another, because of the flaws I've mentioned. Older players are quitting because of the one-tick spell imbalance, and newer players are quitting because they can't get past certain dungeons, because no one's carrying them. That's why you see so many low levels asking high levels for carries. They just can't get through the lower level dungeons with their gear. Now, of course, this isn't every dungeon. Obviously, the starter dungeons, you should be able to get through them with their gear. With the gear from the previous one. You can do Winter Outpost hard with Winter Outpost medium gear. And although difficult, you should know the attacks by now. Especially since Winter Outpost has 5 difficulties, while current dungeons have 2. Which could technically be another problem in itself, but that's just because we don't want dungeons to take 5 years to come out. Oh, and that brings me to my next issue. Dungeons taking so long to release. I believe it was, what, a year gap in between Northern Lands and Gilded Skies? What happened to the days when we were like getting a dungeon like every like 4 to 5 months or something? Like, I'm pretty sure the time between like Ghastly and Steampunk was like a few months. What happened to that? Now, I know that the maps are getting better, but is it really worth the really long wait times? Think about that for a second. Is it? The answer is not very likely. But my point is still standing. Dungeon Quest is dying because of its fatal flaws that have been ignored for so many years now, and it's gone to the point where it's going to be very hard to fix. But there is a way that this can be fixed. Now, step number 1. The dungeon problem can be fixed very easily just by simply giving the dungeons after Orbital a nerf. It doesn't have to be a substantial nerf, but even if they're just nerfed to maybe by 20% of their health and attack, it might actually become doable for players playing solo, because these dungeons were designed for groups, and yeah, you don't get big groups in those dungeons anymore. Like, I'm fine with Gilded Skies being quite difficult right now because a lot of groups are playing it, but like, when a new dungeon comes out, the previous one should get nerfed so that people can actually pass it solo. In fact, they should be able to pass it solo when it comes out, so maybe consider giving it a slight nerf already, because it's just not possible. If you want to counter this for playing in large groups, you can make the health scale upwards more than it does currently, because I believe it scales up by 30% per player. Maybe change that to 50% so groups still remain around the same difficulty, while solo isn't completely impossible. That would be a good idea. Alright, not option. What am I on about? Fix number 2. Actually make multiple tick spells worth using. Anyone remember Samurai Palace, where you had Flame Cyclone or Illusion Blast, and everyone used those, and those were multi-tick spells? That's because these spells actually had something good going for them. They had the speed boost and were the first spells to do it as well. And then Canals just blew it out the water with Bladestorm and Vortex. But like, after that, it started shifting to one-tick spells. Especially seen in Ghastly Harbour, where the 2 speed spells were one-tick. Ground Slam and Smite. Now, Steampunk did fix this. They did introduce some really good multi-tick spells that I believe were used. And Boss Raids was amazing for that. But after Orbital and stuff, one-tick spells kind of fell into the meta. So, maybe make multi-tick spells actually be viable. Like, maybe increase their damage a slight bit. This also brings me to an issue with Warrior. The Warrior build is literally not worth playing over the Mage build. Now, I play Warrior because I've always been a Warrior in Dungeon Quest, and I don't feel like changing it. But it's basically just Mage 2.0. There's no damage difference, there's no point to swing this sword because the damage from spells is so much higher that it's just not worth it. And, yeah. So, also mages have the most overpowered ability to actually heal. Warriors cannot heal on their own, which makes dungeons even more brutal if you're a warrior. So, if you want to play solo, there's literally no point playing warrior because, you won't get very far. I mean, you won't get very far enough as a mage as it is, but warrior needs to change. How do I suggest changing it? Maybe make the weapon damage scale like spell damage does, so it's actually worth still using this swingy swing. Yes, you still wouldn't be able to heal, but at least your special ability that the mages can't do is at least balanced to the mage's healing ability. It would actually make warrior worth playing. And may also fix the problem of one-tick spells taking over the meta because you actually have an option to swing your sword while running at opponents. Because we need that. It's warrior. It's in the name. Melee damage guy. What happened to that? Remember when dealing melee damage was the meta, like in like Winter Outpost and Pirate? God, I miss those days. But yeah, the point stands is you need really good gear to actually do the dungeon. They're basically impossible without it unless you're playing in really large groups. New players quitting because of that. Old players quitting because one-tick spells. And Dungeon Quest is on a downwards path that if it's not resolved soon, Dungeon Quest will die. And it will be down to like no players. Obviously some true fans will not stop playing, but I really doubt to ever see it hit 4 digits if it dies out. And the problems remain ignored. Because each update is slowly diminishing in player count. Like Gilded Skies being the first update in a very long time to not hit 10k players. That should be proof that the game is dying out. Right? Anyway, that's all for this video. MM out.